guess that's the way it goes sometimes. Um, so with dividends, right? So that's what your second channel is devoted to, which I saw.
Mhm.
Um, do you think that's something everyone should be, trying to invest in dividend stocks? And how does that work? I guess first for people that are listening, what is a dividend, and how can it benefit you?
Yeah, so it's great. Obviously, if somebody's listening and doesn't know what a dividend is, well, essentially what it is you own a piece of a company, so like a stock, and those companies decide to typically every quarter to pay out to their shareholders a portion of their profits, kind of as like an incentive to hold on to the company for long term. Generally, a lot of these companies are older or long form content, geez, long formed. Businesses that have been around for a long time and maybe don't grow as fast, so they're not really focused on the value of the stock as much as they are making sure that they can stay consistent with paying these out. um, for me, I don't know if everybody's supposed to be a dividend investor. I don't think so. I know a lot of friends that are only into real estate or friends that are only into the stock market. And then even then in those niches, there are people that are like very specific, like what they want to be in. Like some of the people I know in the stock market only want to be in growth stocks. So companies that don't pay dividends because they want to get that value growth, like Tesla or Amazon or Google, all those big companies. And it's not necessarily saying it's a bad thing. I just like long-term slow growth that is pretty predictable and then also gives me the opportunity to not have to worry about stuff.
Hmm.
Um, so for me, the idea of dividends, what it really entails is that right now, the amount of dividends that I get paid out from companies don't really matter because I'm not using that money immediately. I'm just turning it around and reinvesting. But in about 15 years, the money that's going to come out from these companies and dividends is going to be immense. And then I can use that money to, like I mentioned earlier, go travel, have leisure, do the things I want to do, whether I want to or not, because I have the opportunity with this money. And for a lot of people who do know about dividends, um, the biggest holdback for them is saying, like, well, if I buy into a company for, let's say, $100 and they pay out a 4% dividend yield, to them, $4 every single year is not going to be really sufficient. That's not a great return on your money year over year.
Hmm.
But what a lot of people don't consider is that dividends typically have dividend increases. Not all companies, but a lot of companies will increase their dividends, sometimes upwards of like 10, 15% on an average basis. And if you do the calculations and on averages and everything else, your money from what you put in, 10, 15, 20 years ago and what these companies are paying out in dividends now can be vastly different. So you might be getting 4% today when you don't need the money, but when you retire or when you want the money, you might be getting a 15% return on your money year after year at that point because they've increased their dividends and maybe you didn't buy any more into them or whatever the case may be. So it's kind of a cool thing that most people don't talk about, which is why I started the second channel, because it's just me talking about dividends and almost exclusively talking about them because I think they're misrepresented. And I think people make it look out to be like, well, if you do it today, you're going to get, money that you can live off of today. Like, no, like it's money that you're going to live off of in 15, 20 years, but you have to be patient for it.
Yeah, that's one of the underlying factors amongst people that are really financially literate and end up building a lot of wealth is that long term planning. Where most people are just going for the weekend, where they can get enough drinks at the bar, whereas people that are investing for the future, even like 20 years from now, is the it seems like that's the key or the route to getting
Yeah,
there.
I think for a lot of people, like when they think about these things, they say, well, yeah, dude, one, you don't know if you're gonna live that long. Well, I'm like, well, yeah, if I die, then nothing matters for me. Like it's all a mute point there. But if I live to be, 70 years old, I want to have money to be able to do cool stuff with. But what a lot of people too sometimes kind of misinterpret as well is that depending on how you want to structure your life as well, that for me, as an example, I gave up about 3 years of being able to do a lot of cool stuff
Mhm.
with like friends, family, myself, go traveling and all that stuff to be able to build my business. But now I'm at a point with my business that if I wanted to take a month off and do no work, I effectively will be fine. But I get to have those control because I gave up 3 years. Not really gave up, but like I just didn't really do a lot of stuff. But nowadays, I am starting to earn enough money where I can do really cool stuff if I wanted to as well as save up for really big goals and have my time as well too, because a lot of people don't realize that, like, if you're working for somebody, which is not a bad thing, like, you're being told when you can work and when you have to, take your time off. Like, you might get 2 weeks of vacation. Well, like, for me, I'm like, man, I don't want that. Like, if I want a month off and go live in Hawaii, like, I want to do that for myself. And so I gave up a couple of years of my life to be able to effectively have that control. And 3 years compared to, I'm 30, I'm like 31. So even if I live like the average age, like, I got another 40 years, but I get a lot more of that control for the 40 years rather than somebody telling me what to do, letting me get approved for my days off. Like, no, I'll just take the days off that I want to. Um, and I think the same goes for investing for the long term, right? Like, when I talked about those dividends, I'm focusing in on the fact that if I really am adamant about what I'm trying to do, in about 15 years, I might have about, on average, anywhere from seven to $10,000 a month in dividend income. Decent amount of money, right?
Yeah.
But it's like, I won't get there if I'm not disciplined with it, if I'm not like preparing myself for it. And so a lot of people, I think, will just kind of take the easier route and say, I'm not going to worry about it. And then 15, 20 years comes down the road and they're still having to live that same lifestyle that they did before, where for myself, not including every other form of income I'll have in 15 years, I can take, a couple $1,000s and then go travel or go do something else that I want to do without like the stress of, having to pay bills or having to make, my time worth money because I had to go to a job.
Yeah, I think that's so much better. And I think most people would agree with that. It's just one of the words you mentioned is discipline. And that's not an easy thing. I mean, discipline is not always fun. It's difficult, but in your early ages of life, I think that's the time to dedicate those 3 years or 10 years or whatever it is. I think that's so much more worth it.
Oh
And
yeah, I think it's easier to because I did it from 27 to 30, give or take, or 26 to 30, or something like that. But I'm like, I'd rather do it in my 20s than in my 30s because, at this point I'm gonna have new responsibilities that come into play. I'm gonna have more things going on in my life that it would be harder and harder as I get older. Not saying that if you're in your 30s you shouldn't do it. I'm a believer that if you're adamant about your goals, if you stay focused with it, like, great things can happen from it. Because even if you just like we talked about before with starting with investing or driving, when you first get started, like, you don't know anything. I didn't know
yeah,
anything about how YouTube truly worked. I didn't really understand what it was to be like a full-time entrepreneur. But because I put in that time, the effort, grew as an individual through that time, had the humility to not know things and know that I didn't know things and like look for help or try to learn as best I could, that I grew into that person over those 3 years. And, now, 4 or 5 years into this, it's like, I'm so happy I did it. Because it's like, if I didn't, I now thinking that, oh man, I'd had to start it at 31 or 32 years old seems even more daunting than starting it at like 26 or 27.
yeah, I so agree. And I think that when you're younger, the stakes aren't as high. Like if you go all in on something and it completely fails, it's like, oh, well, you're 25 or whatever it is. Like, at least you're not 40 and have kids and a job and people that are depending on you. Like, it's not as bad it's not as bad to mess up at a younger age.
Yeah, you have more chances to recover it.